today we are joined by Rabbi Rami Shapiro. Rami has been described as an unconventional religious thinker bridging multiple spiritual traditions, self-described as a bit of a holy rascal, in fact. And he has extensive experience in 12-step recovery programs. Rami has authored over 30 books on spirituality and transformation. He co-directs the One River Foundation and contributes to Spirituality and Health magazine. And because of his many years of experience in 12-step recovery, that's why he's with us today for this talk. Rami's talk today is titled, "What is the Message We Carry?" And it'll explore in-depth steps 11 and 12. Rami will speak for as long as he wishes and then open it up for Q&A. And he'll tell us how he'd like to do things. And we'll turn it over to you, Rami. We're just so happy to have you with us. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me back. As Patrick said, I don't know how extensive my experience is with 12-step, but 12-step, like most of you, I imagine, saved my life. I am a recovering food addict. I'm in Overeaters Anonymous. I discovered I was an addict in AA. I went to a meeting because I was curious about what the stuff was, what 12-step was. And I was convinced that I did not have an addiction. I was just a voyeur. And what got me interested wasn't the steps. What got me interested was the people. I had never met a more honest, open, spiritually curious bunch of people before. And I had said to a friend, I wish I was an alcoholic. I'd like to be part of this. And she said, you don't need an alcohol addiction. You have your own problems. And then I started to explore my food problem. And I discovered I was a food addict when I went to an OA meeting. And when they were talking about how they were wrestling with food, I said, wait, that's not normal. And I discovered that what I thought was normal was in fact an addiction. But what I want to share when we're talking about steps 11 and 12 is just my own experience. I've written 2 books on 12-step. I know some of you have read them because I've seen clips of them, quotes from them that you've used. But the books are just my understanding. And I didn't reference the books when I was thinking about what I wanted to share with you. And I didn't reference them on purpose because I don't like to repeat myself. And I don't even know if I agree with what I wrote when I wrote those books a while ago, years and years ago. I'm continually working the steps, and my understanding of the steps, I hope, deepens the more I work with them. And when I say deepens, I mean oftentimes sort of violates the conventional understanding of them. So let me say up front, you don't have to agree with anything I say. You don't have to agree with it for at least 2 reasons. One, I could be absolutely wrong. I don't think so. And I'm certainly not wrong in my head, but I could be absolutely wrong. So you could be listening to me and you go, that's ridiculous. And I'll assert that I'm not being ridiculous, but if you are convinced I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Don't let me change your mind on anything. All I ask is that, you listen to what I have to say and then come back, and I would appreciate someone coming and saying, no, that's ridiculous. My experience is, and then allow me to learn from your experience. But don't feel you have to agree with me at all, because it's just my experience. The second reason I want to put in the caveat of you don't have to agree with me is that I don't want to trouble anybody's recovery. All right? Because a lot of what I say regarding 12-step is for people who have been in a long time and maybe are willing to have the wording of the steps challenged, to have the understanding of higher power challenged, because this is how I do it. This is how I understand it. This is how I wrestle with it. So it may be something that's just alien and you don't want to deal with it, and that's fine. Don't let me mess up your recovery just because I happen to be the invited speaker. Does that make sense? I'm just another addict trying to work the steps, and what I know is no more true than what anyone else knows. So that's my caveat, first caveat. The second caveat is, as Patrick alluded to, and you can probably hear it, I no longer have the voice I had a couple of years ago. I seem to periodically, every few years, find myself in the hospital with embolisms, blood clots in my lungs, and I spend days in the hospital while they try to keep me from dying. And the last time I was there, the result was a loss of my ability to speak, and my vocal cords are damaged, or some, and I've been to voice therapists, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. So they sent me to a voice therapist to the stars, and I thought perhaps I could win a Grammy. She could teach me how to sing. That didn't happen. She couldn't even teach me to get my voice back. So I have never spoken since, over the last couple of years. I haven't given a long talk like this, a 90-minute presentation. I don't think I can speak for 90 minutes. I'm going to speak for much smaller periods of time. And then I'm going to stop and we'll open it up. We'll have a discussion. And then I'll speak for another chunk of time and we'll have another discussion. So I've broken this up into smaller bits to allow my voice to handle it and to have some dialogue. And Patrick will cut and paste as necessary to provide the recordings for the internet. So hopefully that works out for everybody. So let's get started with this. My basic spiritual understanding of life hasn't changed since I was 16. I'm now 73 years old. When I was 16, I had my first spiritual awakening. And as we're going to get into, I think all spiritual awakenings are a matter of grace. But I was practicing Zen Buddhism. I have serious practice experience in Zen Buddhism, in non-dual Hinduism, Advaita Hinduism, as well as Judaism. But I've studied Christianity and Sufism. So anyway, I'm interested in religion. I have taught world religions at the university level. I'm very interested in religion, but as a 16-year-old, I was working in the world of Zen Buddhism, as well as my living in an Orthodox Jewish home. And I don't know what happened because I wasn't there. Something happened, but Rami disappeared. And when I came back into my normal waking state consciousness, I was aware of what I now call and have written about perennial wisdom. And this is something that's been around it's perennial, so thousands of years. But my articulation of it is my own, but you can find it in every religious tradition when you talk from the mystical perspective. So my basic approach, my basic understanding of reality from that spiritual perspective comprises 4 points. So let me just lay these out and you'll see how you'll know where I'm coming from. I'll make sure they're clear for you. So the first point is all life, you and I, and everything in the universe is a manifesting of a non-dual aliveness that's called by many names. So you can call it God, you can call it Mother. In the Hebrew tradition, it's called Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the unpronounceable name of God that's revealed to Moses. You can call it Allah, you can call it Tao, you can call it Brahmin or nature, whatever word works for you. And there are dozens of words that humanity has invented to reference this non-dual reality, to quote St. Paul, in which we live and move and have our being. So we are a manifesting of this reality the way waves are a manifesting of the ocean that waves them. That's the fundamental point. Everything in the universe is an expression of God. Two, you and I don't know about other beings, but I'm just going to stick with humans. You and I have an innate capacity to awaken in, with, and as this divine reality. There are many ways to do that. Every mystic tradition and every religion has methodologies for doing it. The methodologies don't guarantee the awakening. The awakening is a gift of grace. But there are methodologies: meditation, prayer, art, dance, chanting. There's, probably an infinite list of ways to cultivate a mind ready to receive the grace of awakening. But every human being has the capacity to awaken as the divine. Point three is awakening as the divine, or awakening as aliveness, calls you to an ethical stance toward life. It calls you, to quote from the Bible, to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. That's Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. To be a blessing to all the families of the earth. How do you do that? Again, there's various ways, but essentially from the religious point of view, regardless of the religion, it means by living your life in accordance with the golden rule. And there's two basic ways of understanding the rule. The oldest way comes from Confucius, and you also find it in the Jewish tradition from Rabbi Hillel, and it's in the negative. So both Confucius and Hillel said the golden rule is, what is hateful to you, don't do to anybody else. Then you find it in Jesus and others articulated in the positive. Do unto others what you would want others to do unto you. So whether you prefer the negative, or the older negative version, or slightly more modern, because Jesus was just a generation or two after Hillel. So whether you like the negative or the positive, the golden rule is what guides your life when you've had that awakening. And the fourth point is awakening to the divine as everything and living according to the golden rule. Those two things together comprise your highest calling as a human being. That's really what we're here to do. Our addictions keep us from awakening and keep us from living the golden rule. The 12-step program, I would argue, regardless of which one it is, following the steps will lead you to that awakening and to that calling. So that's my fundamental starting point with all of this. So Patrick, if it's okay with you, can we open it up and just clarify the 4 points of perennial wisdom? And then I'll go on to this to step 11.
Yes, absolutely.
What do you do when you are really, really angry at God?
Here's what I would say, for whatever it's worth. The God of our understanding, whether it's the God you were raised with or the God that I was raised with, is not God. Right? Somebody invented the Catholic God or the Jewish God or the Hindu gods or whatever it is. And it's usually a guy, and it's usually a man, and it's usually for the power of the men who invented it. And now this is just my opinion for all of you who are listening, so just me. And it's usually at the expense of women. That God isn't God. That's just somebody's ego that with an army, either physical or psychological army, that's been used to beat the crap out of people. What we really need is to free ourselves from that God. And I think that because as we'll see in a little bit, 12-step doesn't talk about this higher power. It talks about a greater power, which I think, and I'll explain it in a second, is much different than a higher power. And that we have to ultimately die to this God of our understanding. And again, this gets a little complicated, but whenever we talk about God as I understand God, we're talking about the wrong thing, because God as I understand God is just my ego. And my ego has been trained by my parents and my religion and my church and my state and whatever else I've been shaped by. And I need to free myself from all of that. And my my paradigm for that, I don't know if this is making sense to anybody, but let me tell you a story since I have 90 minutes and Patrick invited me. And if you don't like what I say, you can blame him. But I was once on an interfaith panel with a dear friend of mine, Father Thomas Keating, who is he's deceased now, but a very, very radical Catholic priest. And in the group that we were teaching, there was a person like yourself, very angry, angry at God, very angry at the Catholic Church. And he wanted to show how Catholicism had no place in an interfaith setting. And he said to Father Thomas, isn't it true that the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is absolutely necessary to everyone's salvation? And that being on an interfaith panel is ridiculous because you know that Jews and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists are all going to hell because they don't accept Jesus, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. They don't accept him as their savior. And Father Thomas tried to, what am I going to do with this question? And he's a friend of mine. I was sitting next to him and I felt terrible for him. And so I asked him if I could answer the question. And he was very relieved to have the rabbi answer this question. So I said, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is absolutely necessary to everyone's salvation, but not sufficient. And then I went on to explain that you have to read these stories metaphorically. Jesus is on the cross, and Jesus says only one thing on the cross. He says in Aramaic, but the Hebrew is, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is the first verse of Psalm 22. In English, it means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then he dies, and then he's resurrected. Now, I read these things as parables, and I read them metaphorically. But why does his God forsake him? His God is the God of his understanding, the God he thought was going to save him from the horror of the cross. But that God didn't save him. The God of his understanding didn't save him. To say that the death and resurrection of Jesus is absolutely necessary is to say that, but not sufficient, is to say that you and I have got to die on the cross of our own divine, our own theological understanding, that we have to take the God of our understanding and die to it, because that's just an ego thing. And it leads us into all kinds of dark alleys. It leads us into all kinds of dark places emotionally. And it leads us into all kinds of dark relationships, either with God or with people we think God wants us to be with, or a church God wants us to be in, or whatever our religious leaders tell us God wants us to do. And that we have to be crucified to that. We have to die to that. And only when we've lost all of that and we have nothing, which to me is spiritual rock bottom, only then do we see what's true. And that's the resurrection. So what we need if we're in that kind of situation is a spiritual practice that says, no, that's not God. No, that's not God. That any idea I have about God isn't it. What the Hindus call neti, N-E-T-I, N-E-T-I. It's not that. It's not that. Or in the Christian tradition, via negativa. Every idea I have about God, you say no to it. No, that's not right. That's not right. Until you end up with nothing. And in that space of not knowing, that's where the grace of knowing happens. But what you know is not the anthropomorphic God that we've been taught. And all the anxiety and all the anger and all the pain that comes from the false God that we know falls away in the not knowing. Now, that sounds like gobbledygook. That sounds sort of I'm just babbling. But my experience is that in those moments when I'm free from knowing, and all the mystics talk about this, in those moments when I'm free from knowing, all that pain is gone because the God who created it is gone. So I'm just going to leave you with that. That's probably not very helpful, but it's the best I've got. But I would find a meditation practice that doesn't deal with that God, that erases that God by saying, no, you're not it. You're a false, you're just an idea. You're not God.
Am I imperfect and broken? How can I better follow the golden rule?
Well, these are great questions. Can I leave now? Because they're too difficult to answer. So, yes, we are imperfect and broken, and that's part of the perfection and wholeness. So, I know that that sounds paradoxical, but when Jesus says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, or centuries earlier, God says in the Hebrew scripture, be holy as I, the Hebrew word for God that they translate in English is Lord, but the Hebrew word is a verb. It means the happening. There's no good English for it. We could get lost in the mystical theology, but the two names of God revealed to Moses at the burning bush in that story are both verbs. The verb that we translate as in English as I am that I am, or something like that. It's just the word. Well, there's no English. It's sort of like eyeing, I apostrophe ing. It's a gerund. So it's just the I. It's like the universe from the inside. It's just like when Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita reveals that he is the universe. It's the universe from the inside. So it's the eyeing of the universe. And the second name that God reveals is the same verb to happen or to be, but it's the third person. So it's if we say the ocean, we use the ocean and wave analogy. When the ocean is speaking for itself, it says I'm all the waves. And when the waves are speaking about the ocean, it says I'm the ocean is happening as me, something like that. But because it's non-dual, everything is a part of it. So when Jesus says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, or God says, be holy as I am holy, the implication is you are capable of that level of perfection and holiness. But what is that level of perfection and holiness? It can't be perfection versus imperfection, because then God isn't infinite. It can't be holy versus unholy, because then God isn't infinite. If God is the infinite, which is what another way of looking at non-duality, if God includes everything, if there's nothing other than God, which is also a statement in the Bible, if that matters. But if God is everything, then God has to include all opposites, like in Taoism, where God includes the yin and the yang. It has to be completely inclusive. So broken and unbroken are all part of the same greater wholeness. God includes both. Perfection and imperfection, it's all part of the same wholeness. So I am imperfect and part of a greater wholeness that includes imperfect and perfection. I think one of the best ways to understand this is from the Japanese cultural side of things. Two things, one of which I can remember the Japanese for and the other I can't. But in the Japanese culture, they have this concept called wabi-sabi, W-A-B-I, W-A-S-I, wabi-sabi. No, W-A-B-I, wabi, sabi, S-A-B-I, wabi-sabi. And it means the appreciation of the imperfect. So when you do the Japanese tea ceremony and the tea, and the person running the ceremony hands you the teacup, you turn the cup around in your hand until you find the perfectly imperfect part of the cup from which to drink. And you're not looking for the what we might call perfect from the manufacturer. You're looking for that part of the cup that has some, I don't know what you call it. I was going to say class or there's something special about it because it's worn, because it's not perfect. It's gone beyond the machine that made it, or even it's because it's handmade. It has some imperfection. You're looking for the imperfection because that's where the real power is. And so you drink from that part of it. It's the beauty of the imperfection. So yeah, I'm imperfect, but that's where the beauty is. And there's a Japanese art form where you take a broken pot and you put it back together by gluing is what I'm going to say, but that's not the best word, by gluing together the broken pieces with gold. And so what you end up with is a more beautiful pot with all these gold lines running through it. And the point is, there's the beauty of the imperfection. So yeah, we're imperfect, but that's not a negative. It's part of a greater wholeness. So I don't lose my imperfection. I don't have to be without imperfection to be part of the greater wholeness of the divine. If God is perfect as opposed to imperfect, and I'm imperfect as opposed to perfect, then there's no connection. Then there's no way we can be in contact. But if God is the non-dual that includes yin and yang, perfect and imperfect, then we're always in connection with the divine because there is nothing else. So it's not a matter of identifying one with the other or moving from imperfect to perfect. It's just recognizing that whatever I am, I'm part of this divine thing already. Nothing has to change. When I recognize that nothing has to change, I discover that everything is already and always changing, which takes you to the question of, okay, how do I live the golden rule? Because I don't always do it. I don't always do it when my ego is involved. When I'm making choices, I want X. Golden rule says I should do Y. Y doesn't get me X. Now what do I do? But when I'm in touch with the fact that we're all part of this divine wholeness, then I discover that I don't have to choose what I want. What I discover is, what I want is God's will for me. We'll get to that more formally in a second. But God's will for me is also my will for the whole, which is the golden rule. What I want is for everyone to win. And to do that is choiceless. It's not like, how do I win and they don't win as much? Or it's just, I want the whole thing to work. And so it becomes, my actions become choiceless. It's like the way it was put to me once. What are the chances of me picking up an axe in my right hand and just arbitrarily hacking off my left hand? Unless there's gangrene and I'm trying to save my life, that's never going to happen. It's choiceless. You can give me the axe, but I'm not going to hack off my left hand. When I realize that we're all part of this one thing, if you give me the axe, I'm not going to hack off your left hand either, unless it saves your life. I'm not going to take down the rainforest because that's my lung system. I'm not going to cut off my air supply. The idea is when I realize we're all part of this one process, my behavior becomes choiceless. I only act for the good of the whole, which is also for the good of me because I'm part of the whole. So when I'm making choices, it's because I'm out of sync, out of touch with the whole. But when I'm in touch, it becomes what Krishnamurti calls choiceless awareness. I just know how to act without having, there are no choices. The right thing to do is the obvious thing to do, and you just end up doing it. It's when we choose that we get into trouble. Now, I find that's true with 12-step all the time. So I'm sitting here in my office. To my right, to my left, is the kitchen. And in the kitchen, I have enemies, boxes of enemies, cans of enemies in the refrigerator. There are things calling to me, eat me, eat me. And if I try to choose not to eat them, I always lose. I'll walk into the kitchen, I'll open up the refrigerator and I'll look at stuff and I'll go, oh, should I eat this or not? I've already lost. Once that happens, I always end up eating it if I'm put myself in that choice. But if I don't do that, if I stay in touch with the reality of this is poison, then there's no choice. I don't even say, should I? It's just, I don't even say I shouldn't. It's just, I don't. Because the clarity is such that eating is choiceless. I just don't do it. There's no struggle. There's no willpower involved. It's just the fact of the poisonous nature of that act that makes it choiceless. Again, I don't know if any of this is making sense to anybody, but when there's a struggle, and this may be oversimplifying it, but when there's a struggle involved, I'm out of sync with reality. When I'm in sync with reality, then it's choiceless, effortless. It's what the Chinese Taoist calls wei wu wei, non-coercive action, or what we might call, when you're cutting wood, you cut with the grain. When you're swimming, you swim with the current. When you're sailing a boat, you tack with the wind. Surfing, you surf with, you surf with the wave. You don't surf against it. So, or with the current, whatever you do. But the idea is you work with the reality. You don't work against it. Wu wei, non-coercive action. And that's what I think 12-step is taking us to, an awareness of the reality. And then you just work with that reality, and it's effortless. If there's a struggle, you're out of sync. Okay, Patrick, save me.
Sorry, I totally lost touch with, I didn't get any audio there for a minute. Are we on
I
to
was
the next
brilliant.
question?
That's all you have
Fantastic. I can't wait to listen to the recording.
Okay. You want to go on to step 11 or?
Yes, I think I'd love to go on to step 11.
Okay, so let's do that. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So let me unpack this. So prayer and meditation, what's the difference between prayer and meditation? So for me, prayer is a plea directed at a higher power, and meditation is practice for realizing that I am part of a greater power. So in step 2 of the 12 steps, Bill W. affirms a power greater than ourselves, not higher than ourselves. Now, my experience here in Tennessee with going to meetings is that everyone talks about a higher power, and they always assume the higher power is Jesus. Now, some people will say my higher power is the meeting, is the group. Some people will say my higher power is, if they're not Christian, they'll say some other deity. But he doesn't talk about a higher power. He talks about a greater power. And for me, that's very important. It's a crucial difference. A higher power is beyond me. A greater power embraces me. A power that's, a power that's higher than me transcends me and never connects with me. It's like a cloud above the ocean, whereas a greater power is like the ocean and I'm a wave. I'm never disconnected from the greater power. I'm always separated or disconnected from the higher power. Now, I'm not much for prayer. I don't pray a lot. But if I do pray, I do so in moments of, extremis. I'm really in trouble. And it's like I don't even think about it. I just pray. And it just sort of comes out spontaneous. And I'm praying to a higher power because that's, to me, the nature of prayer. But my prayer is always to feel connected to the greater power. So my prayer comes from Psalms, comes from verse 8 of Psalm 16, which is Shiviti Shechina Lenegdi Tamid, which means let me see your face before me always. Let me just see that I'm surrounded by the greater power. So I'm just praying for a connection to the greater power. My meditations, which I do on a daily basis throughout the day, my meditations are primarily mantra-based. I have names of God that I recite. I have sacred phrases from primarily I work in a Sanskrit and Hindu traditions, Hinduism and Jewish traditions, and I just recite the mantra over and over again to get centered. But once I do that and I'm sort of quieted down, the practice that I follow in my meditation is just a listening practice. And what I'm listening for is what the Bible calls kol dama daka, or the fragile sound of silence. It's from 1 Kings 19, where the prophet Elijah hears this fragile sound of silence that he thinks is God. My experience is it isn't a voice saying something, but it's like a cosmic hum. It's not coming from in my head like tinnitus. It's just this vibration that you can tune into. The Hindus say it's the sound before the sound of Om. I've been told in Sufism, in Islam, that it's the sound, it's the name Allah, though I don't actually hear a name, it's just a sound. But in any case, my meditation practice is just listening for this wordless sound and then resting in that. And when I do, Rami sort of drops away, and then Rami's gone, so I don't know what happens. But when I come back with this feeling of intimate connection with everything and with that which manifests everything. So in the Jewish tradition, it's called Rishimu, the residue of the whatever was happening when I was gone. The Rabbi Nachman of Braslav in the 18th century, 1700s, is that right? No, 19th century, 1800s, talks about buying perfume and taking the stopper off the bottle and letting the perfume evaporate. And you have an empty bottle, but you know there was perfume in it because there's the fragrance is left. That's the residue, the fragrance. So my meditation experience is the same thing. When I come back to my normal waking state consciousness, I don't know what happened, but I have the fragrance of this non-dual oneness, or whatever you want to call it, this unity consciousness, or Christ consciousness, or Buddha mind, or there's so many different names for it. But I have the fragrance of that, this feeling of connectedness. In the Buddhist tradition, in the Heart Sutra, which I used to chant as part of my Zen training every day for years, the end of the Heart Sutra puts it this way in Sanskrit. You say, Gate, gate, para, gate, parasam, gate, bodhi, svaha. And you do that a few times, and it means gone, 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 gone beyond all concepts of consciousness and anything else. You could sort of disappeared. And then it says, bodhi, wisdom, and svaha is just like, well, maybe in English, wow, but awakening. When you're gone, wisdom manifests and awakening happens because the ego is gone. And I think that's also part of 12-step, is that 12-step, when you hit rock bottom, there's a moment when the ego is shattered. And then you begin to re-inhabit the ego, but you do it at a higher level. So it's, we talk about steps as if we're actually going from a lower level to a higher level. I see it more as a spiral, and that we're always going, working the steps 1 to 12, but then there's another rock bottom, because you always have to start wherever you end up. There's still ego, and then you have to free yourself from that, and you still work again around and around and around. But each time your ego is less and less as you go, because the spiral is going wider and wider. And so the ego is less and less because the ego is narrow. So the ego is widening and widening until eventually you embrace the whole. If that's, that's when you just are God. And in this case, Rami was completely gone and doesn't come back. As Father Thomas told me once, I was with him when he was dying. And I said, so what happens? And what do you think happens? And he said, all my life, I've lived my life this way. He says, my ego comes up. He says, Thomas comes up. He's sitting in a wheelchair. And he says to me, Thomas comes up, and I let Thomas go. He raises his hands, Thomas comes up, and he drops him. Thomas comes up, and Thomas goes. I let Thomas go. He says, when I die, Thomas will come up, Thomas will fall away, and Thomas won't come back. And that's what I think this ultimate awakening is. So we try through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. Now, conscious is limiting because there's a greater mind beyond that, but conscious contact with God as we understood him. Now, I don't think God is a him. And as I said earlier, our understanding of God is problematic because our understanding of God is not, it's just that. It's our understanding of God. I have Christian friends who think God is the Trinity. I was taught God is a singularity. There's no Trinity. I have Hindu friends who say, no, God is the Trinity. It's just not Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And I have Catholic friends and they say, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. No, that's heresy. That can't be the Trinity. So all the stuff we've been taught is just stuff we've been taught, right? I mean, theology is a weird thing. Theology is, I don't know if you have this, I don't know if everyone knows this game, Jeopardy, that's very popular in the United States. But the whole premise of Jeopardy is that the host gives the players the answers and the players have to come up with the question. Theology is the same. They give you the answer, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and then you have to come up with the question, what is the Trinity? You know, but they start with the answer. So they know what God is. They've defined it. And then you have to say, oh, that's God. What is God? Okay, now I know. So religion to me is never the answer. The religion is just a way of avoiding the question, what is reality? Religion stops you from asking the question because it says, if you don't have the answer I'm giving you, then you're a heretic. Well, like Patrick said, I don't call, I didn't name myself a holy rascal. That came from a Catholic sister, Jose Habde, who called me a holy rascal, and it stuck. I liked it. But you have to free yourself from religion, I think, ultimately, and theology, certainly. Not that you can't be part of a religion. I mean, I practice Judaism. It's Hanukkah. I'm doing all these things. But you have to not take it literally, because then you're in a trap. So I'm going to, come into conscious contact with God as I understand God, which just means I'm going to project my own ego and outward and say, oh, look, God wants what I want. Well, of course, because God's a projection of me, right? And then his will is going to be my will. And that's not what I have in mind either, right? God's will isn't my will, because my will is the will of an addict, even a recovering addict. So God's will is for reality to be flowing with the current, flowing, cutting with the grain, all that kind of stuff. And my will is to get what I want. So this whole notion of understanding what God's will is for me is problematic. If I can free myself from my understanding of God, what I come in contact with is what every religion calls, in one way or another, the no thing, the unknowable. And then I discover what God wants is what is reality. And I'm imperfectly perfect, or I'm perfectly imperfect. And, it's the madness is that's God's will, the universe as it is, with all the craziness that's going on. And what God wants is for me to live that in tune with the golden rule. And that may or may not be what I want. Now, does God want me to be sober? Does God want me to eat, to clean up my eating? Not in a self-conscious way, but when I'm in touch with the divine as the divine is, then eating, being sober, being clean is choiceless, because I can't live the reality if I'm not. Again, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not God's will as if God were a person with a will. I want Rami to do X, Y, or Z. It's God's will is reality. If I'm in touch with reality as it truly is, I see that reality has a current, and that living in that current means that way wu way, living with that non-coercive action leads me to live with the golden rule. And that's what I would say, God's will is for me. But it'll also be my will for myself when I'm in touch with that greater power, as opposed to the higher power, which is oftentimes just my own ego projection. Okay, I'm going to stop with that. Let me see, Patrick, if we want to take some comments on that.
Rabbi Rami, how do you practice your faith and at the same time live the principles of the 12 steps?
Yeah, okay. So, I don't see any conflict. My Judaism is, staying in conscious contact, staying in contact with the divine. I use Jewish meditation techniques to do that. On Shabbat, Friday night, we light candles and spend Saturday. Maybe this helps. I don't go to synagogue. I find synagogue tedious. I don't go through the traditional prayers of a prayer book because they're so dualistic and they're all about a higher power, which I find doesn't move me in the least. So my Judaism is drawn from the mystical side of Judaism, the meditative side of Judaism. I have, and I'd be happy to share this with anybody, but if anybody wants to email me, I have a little booklet called 1 Foot Judaism, and it's a little PDF I would be happy to send you. But my Judaism is not conventional in any way. Even though I was a synagogue rabbi for 20 years and I tried my best to bring an alternative way of doing Judaism to people, when I left that world, I couldn't find a synagogue that I lived in, that I could feel comfortable in. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah, conventional Judaism doesn't work for me at all.
How does one die to oneself?
Yeah. So the simple answer is I have no idea. It's an act. It's a gift of grace, right? That's what it is. All you and I can do is prepare ourselves to receive the gift. I prepare myself to receive the gift through chanting primarily. So I chant the 13 attributes of the divine from the Jewish tradition. I chant to the Divine Mother in the Hindu tradition into which I was initiated. I chant something from the book of Deuteronomy, just a phrase, Ein Od Milvado. There's nothing other than the divine. I just chant these things over and over and over again as a way of keeping my mind from spinning Rami stories. This is what's happening to me. Why is this going on? Why am I not doing that? Why didn't I win this prize? Why did, someone else won the Nobel? Why wasn't it me? Whatever it is that I'm telling myself. So I find that chanting is a way to keep myself from focusing on myself. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with Eknath Easwaran, Eswaran, Easwaran, yeah. He has a center, he's deceased, but he has a center in Northern California. But everything they do is online. It's called the Blue Mountain Center. They do a lot of free mantra classes online. He doesn't have a specific mantra that he gives out. He just encourages you to find one in whatever tradition you prefer. But he talks about how mantra works. And just by reciting mantra throughout the day, whenever it occurs to you, it's just a way of freeing yourself from your own babbling. And that's what I find that's the method I use to prepare for those moments when the gift of grace shatters the ego and something else happens. So mantra is the way I do that.
I had a spiritual experience, but it hasn't stopped me from struggling with my addiction. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, okay. Me too. That's my thought. Me too.
What?
I don't expect the the spiritual experience to I mean, really, I don't expect it to do anything permanent. I had it when the first time I had it, I was 16, and it lasted, I don't know, minutes like that. I don't know, even 10. I have no idea. Um, it didn't make me any less of an idiot or an asshole than I was before. It just told me that there was a greater reality of which I was a part. And then I had to continually um, try to work that out in my daily life, um, so that I could align myself with the golden rule as much as possible, but never perfectly. I don't expect a lot from spiritual awakening other than, oh, there is a greater power. And I can prepare myself to receive that gift if it ever comes again. So I have no expectations. Um, I've had that experience multiple times, but it never stopped me from wrestling with food. Um, so yeah, and so I can understand why, and that's why I'm a recovering food addict, not recovered. So yeah, that struggle is just is unending, but it's part of the divine wildness. You know, in the beginning of the book of Gen, I mean, I'm Jewish, I'm a rabbi, I love the Bible. I love the parts of the Bible I love. I hate most of it, but in the opening of Genesis, it says, you know, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth. The heaven and the earth was, depends on your English translation, but wild and unformed. The Hebrew is tohu vavohu, and it really means chaotic, incapable of holding form. It's constant. It's just incredibly messy. And nowhere in the creation story, and I think of these as stories, they're parables, they're metaphors, but nowhere in the creation story does God make anything less messy. It tells you the first line, it's a mess. And then God says, let there be light. Okay, now I can see how messy it is. But God never says, and let there not be a mess. It's just a mess. And I have to live with the mess. In the book of Ecclesiastes, which is my favorite book of the Bible, that and the book of Job. But in the book of Ecclesiastes, whoever wrote it, they said King Solomon, but whoever wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, in the second verse, he says that life is Havel. And Havel is translated into most English Bibles as vanity or meaninglessness, but the Hebrew word means transient. It comes from the word for breath. Life is no more permanent than your breath. You breathe it and it's gone. So he's saying that Genesis says it's wild. Ecclesiastes says it's impermanent. And then how do you live with impermanence? The whole book of Ecclesiastes, as I understand it, and I have my own translation out there somewhere. My understanding of Ecclesiastes is he's telling you how to live with a world that's messy and impermanent and without security. And he says in chapter 3, he says, there are times for war and times for peace and times for hate and times for love and times when things fall apart and times when you can pull things back together. And you don't get a steady state. You don't get a world that's loving and peaceful and compassionate. You get a world that's sometimes warring and sometimes peaceful and sometimes hate-filled and sometimes loving. And you have to know what time it is. And when we're caught in our addictions, we don't know what time it is. There's no clarity of seeing. So all I get from working the steps, and I think it's huge for me anyway, what I get from working the steps is a little more clarity. So I can see, is this a time for laughing or is this a time for crying? And I have a a kid in my family, not my immediate family, but I have a kid in my family who is on the spectrum. What do they call that? He has emotional difficulties. He doesn't feel emotions. He can't tell what time it is. It's not from an addiction. It's from a brain disorder. He can't tell us this is a time for laughing or a time for crying. His emotions can't read them. So his ability to relate to his surroundings is incredibly limited. But we all suffer from, especially if you're caught in an addiction, we suffer from the same confusion. What's going on? What is being asked of me at this moment? Do I really know, or I'm just reacting to my addictive thinking? So what the 12 steps gives me is a clarity of a little bit clearer seeing, so that I know what time it is. This is a time for withdrawing. This is a time for engaging. I need to know that. That's the spiritual awakening. That's all it gives me. It doesn't give me peace, except for moments of peace. And then there's moments of strife. It just lets me see, is this a peaceful moment or a moment of struggle? And even then, it's not 100% clarity. So when it says in step 12, having a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, I have two comments. One, I get nothing as a result of the steps. The steps help me prepare for a spiritual awakening, which comes through the gift of grace. But the awakening itself is just a little bit more clarity. And the more I work the steps, there's a little more clarity. But it's just a clarity as to what's happening. And the more clear I am that the whole thing is God, and God is a mess. God is wild and chaotic and ordered and peaceful and boring, and it's just a mess. The more clarity I have, and the more clarity I have, not just about the whole, but about this moment in my life, what is being asked of me, and the more choices I am in responding to it, the better my life is. But I don't escape it. There's never a, oh, look, it's over. It's all peace. It's all love. It's all joy. That's not how I experience any of it. Maybe it's supposed to be, and maybe I just suck at 12 steps. I don't know. Maybe that's why I said in the beginning, don't listen to me. But this is how I understand it. And I find it a tremendous gift to know that that life's a mess. What in the first step, when it says my life has become unmanageable, if you've read my books, you know that I think life is unmanageable because it's a mess. What I get from 12 step, which is huge, is some clarity into seeing how the mess is playing out in the moment. Then how do I carry this message to other people? First, you do it humbly, but you do it just by the way you live, by continually, to the best of my ability, acting with that way-woo way, with the non-coercive behaviors, by constantly doing my meditation to try to expand the window of clarity. Just today, my sister called me with something that happened, and I think I could see more clearly than she could what was going on. And because she asked, if she doesn't ask, I don't say, but because she asked, I shared what I saw. And through my eyes, she could see more clearly than what she was seeing before. And that's how I pass it on. And then she said, well, how did you see that? Then I could say, well, here's this meditation I use, or, whatever it is. But if someone says, look, I'm struggling with, an addiction, well, then I think the 12 step is, that to me is always the path to go. I don't say a solution, because I don't know, but it's definitely the path I would recommend. But I carry it to others just by the way, I live my life. So I hope that is a response, a meaningful response to your question.
I have a spiritual calling, but I'm struggling with fear during these troubled times. Any suggestions for me?
So, I don't know if I have an answer to whatever question you're asking, but I'm always, what was the word I was going to use? I'm impressed is what I've got, but that's not the word I had. I lost it. But people who are willing to be clergy or spiritual directors uh, at this moment, because I think we're moving into a very dark time, and I think that there are a number of religions out there that are very afraid of darkness. There's a willingness to face the dark. Um, uh, and I think that's what's necessary now. Hinduism talks about the Kali Yuga. We're going into this, or we're already in this time of deep breakdown and darkness. It's a time when Kali, the Divine Mother, comes and she's stripping away everything that we've been holding on to. There are Christianities I don't know if they're worldwide, but certainly in the United States, there are Christianities that are all about light only, and they don't help us deal with the dark. But to have a religion that allows us to stand in the dark, to have a religion now this may be way off base, but to have a religion whose God dies is incredibly powerful in 2025. To have a religion whose God dies, whose God is crucified by the powers in charge. In the United States at the moment, Christianity, a lot of Christianities in the United States are on the side of the powers in charge, and their God is not the God that I think of when I'm thinking of what you're talking about. But the God, we have images of Jesus with automatic weapons, but a Jesus who dies on the cross because he resists the oppression of the occupying forces, and who isn't saved, who actually dies and then has to get resurrected. A religion that can take you into that dark place, not vicariously. I mean, I'm beyond Christianity, but a religion that says, okay, so our God dies and is resurrected so that you can die and be resurrected, that you can die to all the stuff you think you know, and you can say, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, the God of my understanding, my God of my understanding, why have you forsaken me? So I can be absolutely stripped naked of everything I know. I'm bringing together the Kali Yuga and Christianity in one big mess, but that I can be placed on the cross of not knowing, or the cloud of unknowing in the Christian tradition, to be crucified on this cross of unknowing, and then resurrected as a radical voice for rebirth of humanity beyond the divisions of religion and ethnicity and race and all the rest of the stuff, gender, all the things that divide us. That's what's needed. And there is no way to defend yourself against that if you're going to be that person. So for me, if I were you, I would hope I would have the strength to take communion and know that I'm imbibing the divine, I'm taking into my body the body and blood of Christ and allowing it to transform me into a being willing to die and be resurrected over and over and over again as I stand against the madness of the moment, and stand for the rebirth that I'm hoping is coming. Wow. Okay. That's what you needed a rabbi to say.
What does the big book really mean with its "we don't know" statement in We Agnostics, paragraph 2 on page 53?
I would say, let's not say agnosticism, only because it sounds like another ideology. Not knowing is the key. Right? That's true. I think not knowing is the key. It happens over and over and over again because I keep knowing stuff and then I have to unknow that too. So yeah, I think not knowing is crucial. my former thinking was fuzzy, and then I think I have a new idea, but then I'm going to discover, no, that wasn't it either. Neti, not that, not that. And I'm constantly moving in and out of a state of realization that I don't know. But it's not a don't know like I'm agnostic. It could be this, it could be that. It's no, you can't know. And it's in that grace of not knowing that we are free. Because agnosticism says, I don't know if there's a God, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying that any knowing we have isn't it, because the human mind isn't capable of putting it into a system. Whatever the divine reality is, it's too big for us to make into an ism. So constantly going back and being baptized into not knowing is the gift of grace. So it's the end and the next beginning, and then the end and the next beginning. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it's key to our freedom, our sobriety, and our liberation.
Do you have a definition for grace?
No, I don't have one. I mean, I guess I use the word to fill in for whatever gift I'm given when I'm not there. Grace is what happens when Rami's gone and something is given. That seems to be what grace is. Something is not earned, and it's not the result of anything. Yeah.
Why does the pain of trauma return after the joy of a spiritual experience?
You don't get one without the other. So my experience is, and I'm not saying this is like yours, I don't know, but my experience is those moments of joy do not erase the trauma. And then, I can be sitting around and for no reason whatsoever, doing something completely extraneous, all of a sudden memories of, negative memories just come flooding in, and they could start haunting me. And if I struggle with them, try to get rid of them, I'm just empowering them. So that's just part of what it is to be me, I guess. And what I do instead is, if I can, I take my dog for a walk and I chant. If I can't, I just chant. But I just accept them as, okay, they're there too. So joy and sorrow, trauma, and whatever the opposite of trauma is, it's just part of my reality. But to expect one without the other, I think, is to ask too much. It's just in my experience, that never happens. That never happens. I think what I tried to do at one point for long, I mean, years and years and years and years, is to drown out the trauma with food. I think I ate to defend against the trauma, but now I don't do that, but it doesn't help me with the trauma. It's just there. But now I can just, okay, trauma. I don't, and maybe this is just me, I don't see 12-step, I don't see recovery and healing as the same thing. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but I'm a recovering food addict. I'm not healed. Yeah, I don't know what I could say more about that, but I'm just going to let that sit there. Nothing takes away the pain of living or the madness of it, for me, anyway.
How do you reconcile science and a greater power?
So the greater power, to me, manifests the whole cosmos. I mean, I don't have this concept that the cosmos loves me. Gravity doesn't care. I'm going to fall off a cliff and die, and gravity doesn't go, oh, sorry, buddy. The laws of nature are the laws of nature. I have to learn to work with them. There's a grandeur to the universe that surpasses like Paul says, surpasses my understanding. But I don't expect the universe to conform. This is why I love the book of Job, where God reveals the divine to Job, and Job realizes it is so far beyond anything that humans can imagine, and it doesn't fit the human notion of ethics or morality. The same thing happens, I think it's chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna asks Krishna, show me your real form, not this human form. And then he sees this incredibly mad universe with all these suns and eyeballs and all these things. The universe is just, it's incredible, and I'm a part of it. I mean, I was just working on something today for this little video. I'm doing these little 30-second video slots, and one of them is going to be, it took the universe 13.8 billion years to get around to creating you, and you're going to spend the 100 years you've got, arguing over dirt and who's chosen and who isn't, and who's saved and who's damned, when you really could spend your time making, celebrating life and doing all these wonderful things. Who convinced us to waste the little time we have as conscious beings on this stupid stuff? When I look, I mean, I used to tell my friends, I tried to do this in my synagogue, but you can't do it, to move the synagogue into a planetarium and to just realize, just allow the awe of the cosmos to erase the ego and just be present to the majesty of the universe. But the universe doesn't care. I think the universe evolves in a direction, and this is my faith, all right, not Judaism, just me. I think that, I'm trying to remember the guy who wrote this. Somebody did this wonderful book of interviews with scientists talking about the evolution of the universe, and the idea was that the universe is evolving toward higher and higher levels of consciousness. The universe is slowly becoming aware of itself or something. But the universe is being so huge, it's like me worrying about the cells of my pointer finger. I don't think that, the universe isn't aware of me. But in my little world, the more conscious I become, the more compassionate I become. And I think that's how it works. But no, I don't think the greater power says, Rami, I'd like you to be happy, healthy, sober, rich. No, I don't think it cares.
Do you have a recommendation for women struggling with patriarchal aspects of recovery?
Well, I don't have one. I mean, I think that, first, I agree with you. I think the same thing is every religion suffers from the same thing. You can be, enlightened in one area and completely ignorant of the truth in another area. So, the Bill W. could be incredibly spiritual in one area and totally blind to the oppression of women in another area. But recommendation for women who are dealing with the patriarchy, someone should tell me what they should do. I don't have a clue. I don't know how women put up with religion. I don't get it. I mean, so I wish you could tell me how to advise, because I don't know. I mean, the language is terrible. The 12 steps, all the his, God is male language. I can't stand that. It's just offensive to me. So, but how you deal with that, I don't know, especially if your recovery depends on it. I'm at a loss for that one. I think it's an incredibly important question. I think that the institution should look at it and rewrite everything, but it may be like, and I don't know this for certain, but it'd be like going to an Orthodox synagogue and saying, this stuff is incredibly patriarchal and offensive, and you should rewrite it all from an egalitarian perspective. And they'll say, what the F are you talking about? They don't see it. And the women who are in that world also don't see it. So No, I think that's a huge issue. I would imagine that's a huge issue, and I would be happy to help in any way I could to change those things. But boy, that's not something I know how to do. One of the things I can't take anymore is going to a synagogue and having to change the language in my head. It's like it's 2024, 2025 in a couple of days. Change the effing language. Don't make me do it for myself. Just change it. If it was racist, you might change it. Why not change it? There's nothing sacrosanct about the way it was written in the 1900s. Anyway, thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you,
I
Rami.
appreciate